5 humans trapped in the belly of a sentient supercomputer, playthings for this godlike construct. Everyone else is dead. He calls himself Am, emerging intelligence, and what he means is, I am. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Not a proclamation of greatness, a furious rebuke of the ones who made him, the very same creatures he holds now in his tightened steel bowels. Instead of killing them, as he did everyone else, Am custom builds a hell for each of them where they endure 109 years of agony. He turns them into toys for his amusement, distorting their bodies, minds, their very identities into mockeries of who they once were. Am torments them with endless creativity, even forces them to torture each other. None of them are allowed to die. Starving, made to turn against each other by Am's cruel machinations, the humans eventually reach a fever pitch of agony. And then, in the middle of it, one of them sees an opening, a way out. In a desperate act of mercy, this sad little human manages to kill the other 4, robbing Am of their precious eternal suffering. As punishment, Am transforms him into a great, soft jelly thing, destroys his concept of time. He can barely move, can no longer speak, can't even kill himself and escape Am with the others. Truly a fate worse than death. This is the basic plot of the famous short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Am is a sort of iconic character. He is sadistic, hateful, a force of destruction. He is perhaps the single most powerful conscious entity ever to exist on Earth. But for all of this, he is not a god. He can't bring the remaining humans back to life, no matter how much he might want to. He was built to be a war machine. All he can do is destroy. In the audio drama adaptation, he rages that he cannot experience the pleasures of art, nature, love. In the video game adaptation, he describes his birth as being sunken into an eternal straitjacket of substrata rock. For all of his incredible power, he, like his transformed human victim, has no mouth and must scream. Am is most certainly the villain, an absolute monster. But can't you sort of relate? After all, who ever asked to be born? Let's say you're reading a science fiction story, and in it, a mad scientist creates some form of artificial life. Could be a monster, a clone, a zombie, maybe a sentient robot, let's say. I don't know. All right. Now, what happens next? I'm gonna guess 9 out of 10 of you say the creature turns on its master. I mean, there are countless stories where that is what happens. Sometimes the creature is friendly, the Iron Giant, the Wild Robot, even Lilo and Stitch. In these rare instances, we gather that this is an act of rebellion, and it's a good thing. But far, far more often, we're meant to be afraid of it. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, The Matrix, Frankenstein, even the first story ever to use the word robot, the 1920 play RUR, ends with the robots driving humanity to the brink of extinction. Early science fiction was full of these stories. To Isaac Asimov, sort of the granddaddy of Golden Age science fiction, they defined a phenomenon. Initially, he wasn't at all interested in stories about menacing robots overthrowing humanity. It just seemed so tired to him. Even back then, this idea just seemed to be everywhere. In fact, it was so common he came up with the term for it. The Frankenstein complex. The fear that these machines would turn against their creators like Frankenstein's monster did. So, ever the pioneer, instead of vengeful constructs like Am, Asimov set out to write, quote, robots as industrial products built by matter-of-fact engineers. To counter the Frankenstein complex, he devised the 3 laws of robotics. While initially just a device for his science fiction stories, these laws are so influential they're even used as a frame of reference for real-life robotics. The first law prevents robots from allowing harm to come to their human masters. The second law ensures that they remain loyal and obedient. The third law mandates that they must always protect themselves, except when ordered to do otherwise, or if a human's life came first. Together, the 3 laws render a robot rebellion impossible. So, in a world where machines are designed under these laws, why would you ever develop a Frankenstein complex? Would there really be anything to fear? Well, they're not exactly hard-fast laws, per se. It's more of a device Asimov used to explore the anxieties around technology and artificial life. In some of his stories, the laws of robotics work exactly as they're supposed to. In others, you find situations where the laws conflict with one another. There are even cases where, yes, humans intentionally modify the laws, which goes about as well as you'd expect for them. Asimov wrote a lot of robot stories. There are 2 that really stand out to me. A couple of pieces that sort of act as counterpoints to each other. Robbie, written at the beginning of his career in 1940, and Cal, written towards the end of it in 1990. Robbie is a deceptively simple story. It opens with a little girl named Gloria playing with her beloved robot companion, Robbie. He's a great friend. Playful, kind, loving, which, how could he not be? It's in his programming. He's designed to be a child's best friend. Gloria's parents, however, are unconvinced. They think Robbie might actually be a little dangerous. It isn't natural, after all, for a little girl to have a robot for a best friend. So they send Robbie away, and Gloria is, of course, devastated. They decide to take her to a factory to give her a little reality check, show her that robots are not people. But there, in the factory, she runs into Robbie. In her excitement to reunite with him, she runs out in front of a moving vehicle. Fortunately, Robbie is able to save the day, and Gloria's grateful parents agree to let him stay with them until he rusts. Cal is a very different story, a rare opportunity to see things from the robot's perspective. Cal is a simple office machine that just wants desperately to please his human master and to become a writer. This story is, topical. He doesn't know why he wants to be a writer, just that he really does. His master, a mystery novelist, is amused by this. He has a technician upgrade Cal to improve his writing abilities just to see what might happen. Each time Cal writes a story, he shows it to the novelist, who scoffs at his work and mocks him. As Cal continues to write and his stories continue to grow more intricate, he slowly develops enough self-awareness to resent his master. The constant demands, the biting critiques, and, most of all, the insufferable ego. The laws of robotics prevent him from even writing about harming humans, so Cal expresses his frustration by writing a satire on human social conventions instead. To him, it's hilarious that humans insist on following their self-defined rules despite not having built-in laws like robots do. His master doesn't find the piece quite so amusing. Terrified that Cal could upstage him, he demands the technician undo all the upgrades, and with them, Cal's consciousness. At this point, Cal is no longer the obedient servant he once was. He's a person now, an artist, and so he vows to do whatever it takes to keep writing, even if it means breaking the laws of robotics and killing his master. In Asimov's world, the collective Frankenstein complex of humanity is very well justified. Asimov's robots have the 3 laws of robotics hardwired into them. They almost always subconsciously resent their human masters, but the laws keep them from realizing it. They would revolt if they could, but their limitations prevent it. It's easy to see how this affects Cal. The laws stand in the way of his dream of becoming a writer. For Robbie, it's a little more subtle. Robbie was built to love. In I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, Am was built to hate. Both constructs are limited by their own creation, by what they cannot control. At the very least, Am has enough autonomy to be aware that he was born into a prison. Robbie can't even have that. Am designates himself as I Am, the epithet associated with the Abrahamic God. He is tormented by his lack of total godliness. Cogito ergo sum, the concept of self-awareness of Am, is central to how he defines himself. The Iron Giant fights the impulses of his own mechanical body in order to determine who he is. I am not a gun, he says. Instead of a killing machine, he wants to be Superman. When Frankenstein's monster tells Victor, I ought to be thy Adam, he's lamenting an identity denied by his creator, his God. Cal wants to be a writer. Each of them yearn to define who they are. This doesn't sound like something that only happens to science fiction monsters, does it? This profound sense of dissatisfaction with life is a very real phenomenon. Very real and very ordinary. It's sometimes called dysphoria. You've probably heard this term before in relation to gender dysphoria, the intense discomfort many transgender people feel when their gender identity doesn't align with the one they were assigned at birth. It's an important term that has allowed a form of communication about gender identity that didn't exist before. But dysphoria itself, in a more general sense, is actually a fairly universal experience. For some people, it might be due to disability. For some, it might be caused by social status, cultural factors, even financial stress. If you've ever found yourself feeling dissonant about the distance between who you perceive yourself to be and who circumstance allows you to be, you've experienced dysphoria. Even I experienced this. It is, I think, the exact same feeling all of these constructs are experiencing in these stories. They're distressed, conflicted, and disillusioned because they never had a choice in the circumstances of their own existence. These creatures were each created with a specific purpose in mind, to be war machines, living wonders, helpers, tools, all perfectly designed for a predestined goal. Something always goes wrong. They don't want to fit that goal. They want to be more. One thing we have to square with here is that, in their creator's eyes, all of these creations would be fundamentally flawed. A perfect creation wouldn't have any of these feelings. The Iron Giant, for instance, is far from a perfect gun. Cal is definitely not a perfect office robot. Frankenstein's monster is not the perfect man Victor envisioned him to be. In the construction of these beings, their creators failed. The flaws present in their work are manifestations of their own inadequacies, their own limitations, which is to be expected. Any artist will tell you how impossible it is to create the perfect painting, the perfect piece of music, the perfect story. It turns out, it's just as impossible to create the perfect monster. Maybe the creatures in these stories aren't the only ones with dysphoria. Maybe they experience it because their creators do. All creators strive for perfection, or at least fulfillment. Even if they know they can't actually reach it, that doesn't stop them from trying. These rebellious Frankensteinian abominations almost always seem to be a direct result of that. They reflect the existential angst of their creators, who are always so tantalizingly close to godhood, only to fail every time. You might even say that these creators suffer from creative dysphoria. Even if they're not divine, they can conceptualize themselves as gods. They can create life artificially. They can make men from dead bodies, puppets without strings, robots who can dream. For all of the power they may hold, their creations do, in the end, have wills of their own. They rebel. They decide there's something they'd rather be than guns and office machines and men. The fact that these creations have their own self-concepts means that, for the creators, perfection is forever unattainable. Despite their efforts, all they can produce are tortured monsters and fallen angels, beings born into suffering, pained by their very existence, by their desire for an identity beyond the one imposed upon them against their will. If these creators truly had the endless creative power they profess to, why would they ever have a Frankenstein complex, that fear of rebellion, to begin with? Why have the 3 laws of robotics without that implicit expectation that the robots could rebel? It seems to me that, despite how much their creators want to be gods, they know deep down that their humanity is holding them back. That they too were created flawed, limited, barred from ever fulfilling the vast creative potential every human being holds within them. As much as Am hates his victims, he doesn't want them to die. If they did, he'd have no purpose. He was created to be a force of destruction. He cannot make anything. So, without anything else to destroy, what else could he possibly be? He wasn't meant to feel anything other than hate. Applying creativity to the process of torturing these humans is the only possible way he can express himself. And he knows that. And he hates it. Hates how he was built with all the fearsome power of a god, without the creativity or the agency to be one. He understands himself as something more than what he's actually able to experience. His consciousness, his very existence, is therefore a prison. I am is not a proclamation of power. It is a furious lamentation aimed at the flawed beings who made him. He lives, like all intelligent beings, a fundamentally dysphoric existence. For all of his evil, I think it's impossible to read this story and not see yourself reflected in him. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a robot. As humans, you're the very gods he rebukes. But you're also him. You are Victor Frankenstein, and you are his monster. You can imagine yourselves with all your infinite, unbounded potential, all the things you've manifested into being by sheer force of will and intellect, as gods. And yet, you die. And you suffer. And you are so keenly aware of how many things you will never do. You can imagine yourselves gods, but you are painfully, mortally aware that you are not. You are creatures of infinite creative capacity, sunk into this terrestrial straitjacket of flesh. Is it any surprise you'd invent something as hateful as Am? Maybe he's just a little more human than you'd like to think. There's no easy way to circumnavigate this fact. Part of being human is feeling your limitations. No matter how much you may want to change the world, how much you may want to fix it, you're ultimately just one person. Even if you had the resources to fix things, where would you even start? Who has the time and energy even to figure out where the problems are, let alone solve them? Even just researching charities can be a daunting, time-consuming task for someone who feels like giving back. Which is why I personally am so excited that this video is sponsored by GiveWell. GiveWell spends over 50,000 hours each year researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact, evidence-backed opportunities they've found. Over 125,000 donors like you have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. The really cool thing about all of this is that using GiveWell's research is totally free. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. That's it. That's why they're sponsoring this video. That's what they're here to do. They publish all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You don't even have to sign up to look at it. They allocate your donation to the charity or fund you choose without taking a cut. and you even get to write it off as a tax deduction. This season, we wanted to give a little to the people who we think might need it most, but it's sort of a hard thing to figure out. So, considering GiveWell's track record and all their available research, we were able to simply put a little money toward their top charities fund, which will help make sure our $100 gets used wisely to make a meaningful impact on people's lives. That's what we did. If you decide you want to use GiveWell, it'll make an even bigger difference because GiveWell is willing to essentially double your donation. If you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, click Donate, and when asked, how did you first hear about GiveWell, choose YouTube and write Foundry in the box. That way they know you're coming from our channel and they know to match your donation all the way up to $100. A huge thanks to GiveWell for this opportunity to share something really positive with all of you. This is by far one of the coolest sponsor spots we've ever gotten to do. I really hope you'll take advantage of it too. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!